Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, we were supposed to be discussing, and I will have a little mini review and conversation with Sona about a show called Based on a True Story. But actually, called an audible here in the middle of watching that show, we are going to be discussing A Man on the Inside, the new Mike Schur comedy series starring one of his favorite actors, Ted Danson. They worked together previously on The Good Place, also available on Netflix, by the way. And this show, by the way, available on Netflix. And I'm going to explain a little bit of what my thought process is with that, because it went on a little journey with these two shows. And I can't wait to hear Sona's opinion of this particular show. But before we do that, a couple of things. Sona, do you have any holiday plans?
Well, my holiday plans are the same as usual, which are just seeing family in our local area. Well, I guess not as usual. Sometimes we travel, but this year we won't be traveling. We're just going to stay local, see family, hope for some good weather.
It's going to be cold, Sona. Even some snow.
But my kid needs to run off his energy. So I don't know what we're going to do about that part. We'll see how it goes. How about you?
Just as follow up on that note, my daughter's outside right now, as cold as it is and windy, but the sun is out. So she's out there with like short sleeves on. So after Thanksgiving, you guys will have to bundle up, but your son will probably be able to run around in the sun and not mind the cold weather at all. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, I have a variety of outdoor activities that we can do. So I've got like a paper airplane set, and we've got some sparklers, which we hope to be able to use now that the fire warning, I assume, is over since we had a couple days of rain. Yeah, hopefully we can get out there, if only for a few minutes.
Yeah, we're having a family over as usual. We're hosting here like we usually do. My wife's mom will be around. My parents are around. They're visiting.
That's nice.
My sister will be here. The nephews will be here. The usual crowd. So it'll be nice.
That's a good sized crowd, though. That's fun.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's the only time we use our dining room table pretty much every year. So. And yesterday, by the way, I was very impressed with this. I'm just going to shout out my own daughter here. My wife organized as a Girl Scout activity to donate food at Turtleback Zoo.
Great time of year for that.
Yeah, and it's a huge turnout. During the food drive, you can go in the zoo for free. So when we got there, it was absolutely packed. People were already there, had already donated food. It was just like piled up in the tent they set up for us. A heated tent, so the girls were not cold.
Nice.
I want to shout out my daughter because totally not provoked by us at all. She decided to like run the event, and she was so conscientious of everybody. I was so impressed. She took it so seriously. The best part about it was she'd have the girls, everybody wanted to do the food, which was the biggest thing was food. Then secondary was toys. And then there was other things. The girls would get bored if they were doing some of the slower boxes, like they're basically sorting these things into boxes. The girls would get bored if they weren't getting on the food. But she would see that some of the girls were getting bored and would start screwing around and get distracted. And she would say, do you want to swap jobs with somebody else? And then if they're like, oh yeah, I want to do the food because it's the busiest part. And the girls who were doing the food would be like, well, I don't want to. She would be like, well, how about you just do it for like half an hour and then you could hang out with your friend and then we'll switch back again. I was so impressed. She ran the whole entire thing like
a manager in the making.
Exactly.
Good for her.
And I've never coached her to be this way. So I was really just totally impressed by her, I got to say.
Amazing. Good for her.
Yeah, so shout out to my daughter. who does not listen to this podcast, by the way. She's only 9, so. And oh yeah, I just want to make a couple of show notes real quick. We will be continuing to cover the spy series. The Day of the Jackal had a very eventful episode. We'll be publishing on Wednesday or Thursday. Then starting on Friday, Sona, this Friday, on Paramount Plus and Showtime, The Agency with Michael Fassbender. Are you on board for that show?
Sure.
Great. First episode. I think only one episode premieres this week. I guess this is because it's the time of year where you have Black Friday deals and people might be getting subscriptions to these services. Paramount has all of a sudden a bunch of high profile series that are all going to come out one after the other. So if you are contemplating Black Friday deals to pick up Showtime, for example, obviously, if you want to watch The Agency, I am very excited for this show. So if you are a fan of Fassbender, if you like spy thrillers, which I very much do like, that starts this week. Then in just a month, we have the prequel series for Dexter. And so they just announced February 15th, I believe. So probably right around the time that The Agency and Dexter are wrapping up, Yellow Jackets is coming back for its 3rd season. And I know many people, finally true, but also many people now are just catching up on Yellow Jackets for the very first time because, of course, the Netflix effect. Yellow Jackets is now available on Netflix. And of course, that has skyrocketed in popularity. So maybe all of this synergy is going to be good for Paramount Plus. We'll see.
Right. Interesting.
Okay. So originally, I was going to cover a series that we covered last year, or maybe 2 years ago at this point. I don't even know. Time is a flat circle, especially when it comes to this podcast, based on a true story, the Kaylee Cuoco and Chris Messina's comedy series about podcasters who start a podcast, a true crime podcast, when there starts to be a series of murders near their apartment building. And they had a lot of questions about the culpability, or maybe like our dark fascination with these crimes through these true crime entertainment industry that we've created. And long story short, they end up befriending the killer to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to cover this show because it had been relatively popular for us on the podcast, even though the show wasn't, a huge crossover success. And I called an audible in a few ways. First of all, it became incredibly hard to get Sona onto a Peacock subscription.
First of all, Sona is cheap.
Well, you know what, though? But here's why. I mean, I do want to call this out as part of this conversation about streaming deals and things like that. And I share my Apple TV Plus subscription with Sona. So for anybody, this is just another, I've said this before on the podcast, but just another PSA. I sound like I am always shilling for Apple. I do not get paid by Apple, just to be clear, not for their TV shows and not in this regard either. But if you get a subscription to a channel, for example, I have gotten a 1-month subscription to Shudder because the horror streaming site, which also includes AMC Plus or vice versa, I will activate it for 1 month and then I will turn it off because I want to watch something with Celia, who's also a big horror fan, and I'll share the subscription with her. And you basically can create a family inside of your iPhone. Every time I say this to people, they are flabbergasted this exists. So I do recommend people be aware of this. Any subscription you have, if you have an Apple subscription or any kind of month-to-month subscription you buy through Apple, you can then share with your family, right? So it's like, it could be Apple Fitness, but it could also be other apps, even gaming apps that you might have had a subscription and you want to share it with a friend so you can play games together. You can actually share your subscriptions, create a family group in your iOS device, get the subscription via the iOS device. It's also very easy to cancel them. Literally 1 click to cancel a subscription. So if you want to activate it on day 1 and then deactivate it seconds later, it will then automatically cancel within a month. And of course, you can share that subscription with your family members. Long story short, I wanted to do something like that with Sona. Peacock is one of the least successful of the streamers and has disabled a lot of the workarounds for sharing subscriptions with other people. So for that reason, I think pretty much because they're, if you've heard the headlines recently, they're probably, the way of the dodo within the next few months. So another reason to not really pay for a subscription for something that is probably going to die within, 6 months or so, probably less. So there's not really content out there. It's not convenient for sharing. I didn't really want Sona to pay for it. And then I watched the seasons of the show and it ends on another cliffhanger, as you would expect. It has a pretty satisfying act to these characters. I actually was hoping there'd be some level of redemption for these characters, but I was pretty disappointed I'm disappointed with the characters. So in a way, I think the show might be doing what it wants to do in that it rehabilitates them to a large extent over the course of the season. And then it ends things on a really cynical place. And without spoiling it just for me, for my taste, I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I want to recommend this to the audience. It's really not worth watching, I'd say. Although Kaylee Cuoco, very funny. I think she's very funny in this. So that's a reason to watch it. But then one last part, by the way, is that I track on a few different websites like Just Watch and IMDb's activities and a few other places to kind of see, well, how popular is this show? And long story short, even though many people apparently have Peacock subscriptions because Day of the Jackal, since its premiere, has been in the top 5 streaming shows every single week, this show is not even on the radar. Very little activity. So I don't think people know this is back. If you love the first season, maybe this is the first time you were aware, as you hear me say this, that it's back. So if you are a diehard fan, then go seek it out. I thought it was not great, but it has really funny moments. If people aren't going to listen to it, and I'm not really that enthusiastic about it, and Sona can't really watch it, I'm like, well, what's the point of covering? Which all means that I was looking for something for us to cover. And I am a fan of Mike Schur. I'm a fan of Ted Danson. I really like The Good Place. So I was very curious about this new show, A Man on the Inside. And most importantly, was that I thought this is going to be part of our spy theme, because you see the artwork on this. He literally is like in a James Bond pose, and all the titles to the episodes were spy spoof references. Like the very first episode is called Tinker Tailor Older Spy. Get it?
Oh my gosh, I totally missed that about the titles. I need to go back and look.
They're all very funny. I'll let you know which ones they are as we go through the episodes. But the first one is Tinker Tailor Older Spy, which I thought was very funny. So there's this spy connection. Let me just say that this show has been hugely popular, Sona. Immediately went to number one. I'm really glad that people are finding it. This really does not turn out to be a spy thriller. I mean, they pretty much abandoned this probably by episode 2 or 3, but I loved this show. What did you think of it?
First of all, I'm shocked that it's doing so well, because I had not heard of it at all until you mentioned it to me.
It's the Netflix magic. Netflix magic.
I am happy that it's doing well, because I agree with you. This is especially coming on the heels of our Disclosure Watch, which was very grim. Right. This is like a heartwarming, feel-good show in a way that I think is not all that common nowadays, or maybe they are out there and they're just not that popular, so I don't know about them. It's been a long time since I've really found something that is just so heartwarming. It leaves you warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things I really loved about Ted Lasso during the pandemic, when things got so dark, and I think part of the reason that became such a phenomenon, is that it was such a kind, an open-hearted series. And if you want to pair this up with anything, I would pair it up with Shrinking, which also has a very humanistic point of view. Yes. Different creators, but very much have the same kind of philosophy.
I agree.
If you want to pair these two up, it's closer to that than anything else. But I do get a little irritated, even in Shrinking, which I'm still enjoying and still watching. There is almost this maybe unrealistic expectation that, well, if everybody was just kind to each other, the world would be a better place, which I agree with. I think there should be more kindness. And I definitely like to shout out when we find things that are actually good, but also have a real sense of decency to them. I mean, which is rare, believe it or not. I mean, especially in, what they consider the prestige TV, like you mentioned, Disclaimer, which is just like so cynical and so dark that, which is a limit to its appeal, I think. But this is very much the opposite. But it doesn't seem to be too Pollyannish in that regard. Maybe it's also, and that's another reason maybe this thing hits me harder, I am watching my parents and my wife's parents age and the complexities of that. And this is a series that puts you in the perspective of an aging person dealing with all these things from inside of that experience. Obviously, I'm seeing it from the outside, but it is really just kind-hearted and gentle and gives all these characters some humanity. And yeah, I think especially if you have older parents or if you yourself are dealing with some of these issues, I think that it's really a lot of fun. And it has things to say, they're not profound things, I think, but it is just good to see some empathy for things that we all are dealing with, honestly.
The Shrinking comparison occurred to me too, especially just now as I was talking about this show. This show is more wholesome than Shrinking in a way, because Shrinking does touch on some themes that when my kid is in the room, I'm kind of like, oh, I didn't realize how much was going on in this show that is not appropriate for a 7-year-old. Whereas this show, I think I could easily watch with my 7-year-old in the room the whole time.
Yeah, this is like a network level of sitcom. It has swear words in it, but other than that, it's basically could be on NBC.
Yeah, I agree with the idea that I've heard in popular culture lately, and maybe you've heard it too, the sandwich generation, which we are kind of part of, that you're taking care of your aging parents and your children at the same time, and the stress that goes along with that, which we are all definitely experiencing. And I think probably your wife and I are very similarly situated in that we're both only children with a single parent that is having health issues and trying to walk the line of letting them be autonomous, because why shouldn't they be? And knowing when to intervene and saying like, okay, I think this needs some assistance and I've got to get involved. The stress that goes with that, all at the same time being like, it's Spirit Day tomorrow. Where is your school sweatshirt? It's kind of a lot at times.
Yeah. To a lesser extent. I mean, I kind of am sharing that experience with my sister, and my parents very much, they have each other, obviously, but they also are very much dependent on us in many ways. Watching this series makes me worry about what the future holds, but it is still life affirming, like even this late
Oh,
in
absolutely.
life. I think it's really wonderful and people should watch it. It's a lot of fun. These are half-hour episodes, 20-something minute episodes.
Super fast.
You could binge this so quickly on a break between meetings, literally. What I did a couple of times, just binging one of these episodes.
I watched the whole thing in one sitting. So.
Yeah, I watched it like probably between meetings on Friday when I started watching it. I watched maybe 2 episodes while I was making dinner, and then I finished it up that night. Yeah, over the course of one day, I watched this whole entire thing, which is only like a less than 4-hour commitment. So it's not like a huge amount of time. Let's get into the show a little bit, break it down. The first episode, Tinker Tailor, Older Spy, like I mentioned, instead of Soldier Spy, obviously the John le Carré famously. We start off, Sona, if you remember all the way back when you started this, we start off with creepy Ted Danson.
It was less than 24 hours ago. So
oh, that's true. You've watched it very recently, right?
Yes, my memory, it should be fairly vivid, but I did want to ask you about this scene. I wasn't sure if it was pulled from somewhere else or if it was CGI or what.
Oh, it's definitely CGI. Ted Danson, which very recognizable from his Cheers days. I'm sure this AI model was trained on many episodes of Cheers. He has the very big head. He had very big hair back in the day. His hair's still pretty big.
I mean, in Cheers, it was a running joke, right, about his hair. If I
it's like a helmet,
correctly. Yeah. but it was considered great hair, right?
Yeah.
That he was like so into his hair.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it did have great hair in the day. And I have a question for you in just a moment about that. Yeah, this is CGI or say AI, probably Ted Danson. They do a clever thing here. It's pretty cheap. Like I literally was watching it very closely because of that. You know, this is something that we've seen more often than not. By the way, I don't know if you knew about this, but for example, if you've seen the most recent Mission Impossible movie and you've seen Tom Cruise in person, who finally this ageless man is starting to age in that movie, which was shot over the course of like 2 years because of the pandemic and other things, you can see him aging on screen. But I don't know if you knew about this, Sona, but there is now like a $10 million budget baked into these large movies where they have what they call CGI cosmetics or something like that. But basically it's like makeup. So the idea is not that they're actually doing makeup, but that the computer smooths out the rough edges in close-ups and things like that. And this is like now baked into the budget of movies.
This sounds like a very advanced version of the Zoom beauty filter I have to
Yes, basically, right. Exactly. Much higher end level of that for sure. By the way, I've been trying out different platforms for recording here on the podcast. And one of them had that kind of filter. And someone commented on it because I had the video on it. Everybody's just like, oh my God, did you like de-age by 10 years? I'm like, oh my God, it must be like the smoothing on the platform. But it was, I did look very pretty, by the way, comparatively. So yeah, this is like a very high-end version of that. I take that back. It's not a very high-end version of that. It's not very sophisticated. I could see like weird edges on his hair and things like that. But they do something clever here, which is that they do this information dump about him and his wife as part of the wedding video. So I thought it was I actually took a note that this is a clever way to have that information dump is like, just flash back to the wedding video itself. And of course, there are some limitations to how much money they probably spent on this. So they hide it by the fact that it's an old VHS, right? So it's low resolution to start with. So it's a way to hide all this. But I don't think it's that effective, by the way, I have to say, because the whole time as we're commenting here, you're like, oh my God, what did they do to Ted Danson? Like you're not experiencing it as like an actual video artifact. You're more like shocked to see it. But did it work for you at all?
Yeah, I thought it was great. It was a great introduction to framing the situation that he's in.
And since I tune into these things, I do want to call out that they did a good job of the voice on this. I have not watched the new movie Here. Have you heard about this movie?
No, I haven't.
There's a movie called Here that is a huge box office disaster. It's made $11 million, I think, in the US. This is Robert Zemeckis and reuniting with Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. These are the 3 people who, of course, were the stars and director of Forrest Gump 30 years later. It tells the story of this family, and the camera is locked off in one position, so just in their kitchen, and you see them age. Tom Hanks, if you watch the trailer, you should watch it after this conversation. Tom Hanks has been de-aged to 40 years ago, basically, like bosom buddies Tom Hanks, all the way up to present day. And I haven't seen the movie yet, and the reviews have been pretty negative on it, by the way. But I do very much want to see it. But people have been complimenting it on the fact that where the de-aging has fallen apart in the past is the actors' voices they're aged voices.
Mhm.
And apparently in this movie, they not only use the AI for the younger Tom Hanks, but they like AI'd his voice to be a younger version of his voice. So you hear his voice aging also over the course of the film. And people have complimented it on technically, although they don't like the movie that much. But anyway, I'm very curious to see it just for that. But if you see the trailer, it is very convincing that this is young Tom Hanks. It's pretty shocking, actually.
Mhm.
Much more high quality than we see here. But I do want to compliment that Danson's voice has, I think they've done something to his voice as well, because his voice does not sound old,
Right.
voice in a young body, right?
Interesting.
Really beautiful soundtrack, I have to say. They start off
Mhm.
with The Wind, right, by Cat Stevens, Yusuf now. At the time, Cat Stevens, when this song was popular back in the 70s. But all these songs are about dealing with mortality. I thought these are some beautiful musical choices, actually, and appropriate too. Like it's not, I think there's a couple of contemporary songs as we get later into the series, but most of these songs are like from the 60s and 70s, which is probably songs that Ted Danson has on his Spotify playlist. And as we're introduced to his character, Charles, appropriate name for this type of character, I think.
Mhm.
Charles, we see that he's very methodical. He's a little OCD. It turns out he's an engineer.
Mhm.
And once again, I'm going to keep talking about Ted Danson's appearance here. First of all, now that we see him in present day, looking astonishingly good, I have to say, for 77 years old.
I agree.
So question, I was complimenting Kevin Kline on holding up so well, 77 years old. Also, by the way, he's actually slightly younger than Danson, just by a few months, but they're both 77. So, Sona, Ted Danson or Kevin Kline, who's holding it together better?
Oh my goodness. How could you make me choose? I think they both look fantastic in their given, they're kind of different genres of people.
Yes.
Whereas Ted Danson is like that very standard, tall, dark, and handsome kind of type, right? With like a chiseled jaw and sharp features. Kevin Kline is a little bit softer around the edges. And I think, in those respective zones, they both look fantastic and continue to have those kind of characteristics.
Ted Danson has the height going for him for sure.
Very tall man. Yes.
All right. The next question I have for you, Sona, is once again, can't get past the appearance of these characters. Ted Danson famously lost his hair a long time ago. He was wearing a hairpiece on Cheers. And I was looking at, like, you can see hair follicles. Is this the best hairpiece in the biz? What do you think?
Maybe he's had a hair transplant. That's
he may
possible,
have, yes, at this point. Yes, true.
Yeah. He has, I would assume, tons of money. So why not get a hair transplant?
And can you imagine the kind of money he makes? They were talking about how the cast of Friends gets $20 million per year from streaming rights on their shows. Can you imagine what Cheers gets in streaming rights worldwide every year? Danson must be making, who knows, $25-30 million a year.
Yeah, and he did work some after that as well, right? Not as renowned shows, but Becker, that one was on for several years.
I actually was fascinated by his career. He has pretty much never stopped working since the 80s, right? You have Cheers, obviously, that runs forever. He had Becker, which ran for a very long time, 7 or 8 years, I think.
Not a bad show, by the way. Good.
Yeah, I watched it. I watched it back in the day when there was much more limited stuff to watch. He was a movie star for a little while with Three Men and a Baby.
Right.
So he had like a moment where he was a huge blockbuster star as well. And then when his movie career dried up, he went back to TV. And like you mentioned, had multiple shows that ran for years. Even recently, right? Like just recently, just how ubiquitous the guy has been on TV forever. He did, what was it, 4 seasons, 5 seasons as CSI. He replaced, what's his name? William Peterson was the lead investigator. And then after he left the show, now he's back for the offshoot version of this, by the way, the CSI Las Vegas or whatever it's called on Paramount Plus. They replaced him with Lawrence Fishburne for a couple of years, and then with Ted Danson for, I believe, 4 years. Anyway, and this is just recently, by the way. It's like he has never not been on the air, but he did an excellent, maybe the best season of Fargo. Absolutely terrific job he did there.
Fantastic. I mean, good for him. And unfortunately, stays consistent with my theory that the way to stay sharp and active as you age is to continue working, unfortunately.
That's true. That's a good point. Oh, and of course, can't mention or forget to mention that he was on Curb Your Enthusiasm for that entire run of that, and playing such a great version of himself on there, like a much more jerk version of that, but still.
And famously married to Mary Steenburgen for such a long time, right?
For a very long time.
Who also is in the same industry.
Yeah, they've had, once again, had a very successful relationship also. But anyway, a big fan of Ted Danson. And more, not even
all this to say.
Have you ever seen on HBO, he was on 3 seasons of a show called Bored to Death. Have you ever seen this?
No, I vaguely remember it, but not well.
It's still available on Max. It is so funny. It was Jason Schwartzman as this very failed writer who turns into a private investigator. This is Zach Galifianakis before he was famous, before the Hangover movies. Anyway, watch this. It only lasted for 3 seasons. Absolutely hilarious. And Danson is in every episode as well as one of his friends who helps with his investigations. Like a guy who should be more put together, but is actually like a neurotic mess. Anyway, very funny. He's great on there. He's just been all over pop culture for years, and I've always been a fan of him. I like that he plays with his persona, like the gravitas he brings, but often is willing to play goofball. He does it here again. Totally believable as this type of character, doing this private investigation and also being kind of in over his head and charming about it, even though he is 6 feet tall.
So charming.
Just the charm of him in this show, really, he's basically put to his best, shown in the best light. So we have a lot of Good Place alumni showing up here. The guy who hires them is from that show. So if you watch that show, you're going to see a lot of the same people. I do like the fact that early on they introduced this fact, they're kind of getting his backstory. His wife has passed away. She had dementia. His daughter is critical of the fact that he basically just boxed up all her things and put them away after she died. I took a note. This is exactly what my wife will do when I pass on. She'll just like box up everything and probably just throw it out. Because she throws away everything. Like I could have bearer bonds. She's like, I don't know what this is. It's going right into the trash.
Fake money, it looks like.
Yeah, I don't know what this is. This is going to the garbage. You get shredded immediately. We discover his relationship with his daughter, which I think once again resonates a lot, being a parent, being a child of someone who's approaching this age, and relationship issues. This is like, there's really nothing outlandish about this setup here at all. I mean, I think it's very realistic. I had a lot of empathy for all the characters. I love the daughter character from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. People recognize her from that. The distraction of the kids on their devices.
I love the kids. The kids rang so true to me, and their relationship with kids as well rang so true to me. Even though mine, I think, is younger than her youngest in this, I feel like I'm having the exact same interactions, right down to being called bro all the time.
Right, bruh. This is bruh. It's not bro.
Yeah, that's true. It's bruh.
Drinking the internet. I love that when they're like, "What are they drinking?" Oh, don't worry, they're just drinking the internet.
Yes.
Which is all kids are just always drinking the internet, as are we all, by the way.
Truly.
I also love the fact that he gets the job. Another thing that we all can relate to. Mom, can you just send me a text message? Mom, can you just don't read that email. Just don't respond to emails that you don't know where they're coming from. And basically just because he has the lowest level of, ability with the internet, they're like, okay, you can send a text message. You're hired.
Yes.
to infiltrate this nursing home.
I love that as a test of their tech savviness as well.
Take a picture of that and then send it to me.
Yeah.
I like the one guy who's just like, she's like, what are you doing right now? I don't know. I have the calculator. I'm just
adding together numbers. Yeah.
I did very much like the training montage in episode 1 where she's like taking him out and like, here's how you observe, here's how you record. And, he's pretty adept. Pretty inept at a lot of these things.
Yeah, it also reminded me of, one of my favorite shows of all time, Psych, where it's a father-son duo, and the father is a cop who has trained his son to be hyper observant, essentially. So they're constantly having these quizzes sitting in the pizza place. Yeah, you can have a cookie if you can tell me how many people in this restaurant are wearing hats right now. And the kid always gets it right. So this is the opposite, severely the opposite.
Right. I honestly thought that this would be maybe a little bit more of a thriller where he's infiltrated a corrupt nursing home. And maybe that was my expectation. So I was surprised at how low stakes this is. It really does feel like sitcom stakes. Maybe they could do something. They do set this up for season 2 where he could be drafted again to do another mission, which I think would be a lot of fun, especially if this is going to continue to be this popular, I think they're definitely going to greenlight it for another season. I can't imagine this costs that much, except that it's actually shot in San Francisco, beautifully shot in San Francisco.
Beautifully. Well, I will say, as someone who I kind of feel like a broken record complaining about this show can't decide what tone it wants.
Right.
This one at least picked one and stuck with it, right? They didn't try and all of a sudden make this high stakes life or death storyline entwined with this heartwarming family dynamic. So I am at least happy it picked a lane and stayed in that lane.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That is more of maybe the limitations of A Good Place, or the worst parts of A Good Place, which I love that show, by the way, but the worst aspects of it are oftentimes trying to shoehorn in the fantasy elements and, trying to increase the stakes or have cliffhangers at the end of the season and then go back into really being just a sitcom routine again for the 80% of the next season. So that was kind of odd on that show. Although, like I said, I think it really stuck the landing, by the way. I don't know if you ever watched it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Beautiful ending to that whole thing. Another thing I think is still on Netflix, so do check it out if you haven't seen it. Wonderful series. And also very life affirming, very much on brand with this creator. One more thing I want to shout out that also I think is still streaming on Netflix, and I think many people are catching up on it now, because now it's available there. When they get to the nursing home itself, we see that it's run by Dee Dee, played by Stephanie Beatriz from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, playing a very different role, which I
very
really
different.
A lot of fun to see her here. But I just want to shout out Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is really, really funny show, especially
Amazing
like season 1 and 2.
Yes.
Hysterically funny. So
hysterical. I agree with you. Andre Brower in that. Amazing. It's
incredible. I know. R.I.P. Yes. Andre Brower. By the way, if anyone wants to get Peacock for one reason and one reason only, they finally, Homicide: Life on the Streets is available. This thing had not been available to stream for the longest time because there were so many music clearing requirements for streaming. That's why oftentimes with streaming, by the way, because the rights are so different, you'll only hear like one needle drop in an episode of television. Anyway, there were so many songs that needed to be cleared. It took 10 years. When Andre Brower died, they accelerated that process. So finally, now it's available on Peacock. That is extraordinary. Like his performance in that series is one of the most incredible TV performances of all time, and a completely different register than Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but very funny on there as well, obviously, but very different than Homicide. But I just want to shout it out. If you do have Peacock, do check out Homicide: Life on the Street. And you don't have to watch the entire season. You can literally go to lists. So just say, what are the top 10 episodes? These will be some of the best episodes of TV you will ever watch. And then you want to go back and watch the entire season. But it's very much old school TV. It's around one crime per week. So you can definitely watch it that way as well. Do check that out if you happen to have Peacock because you're watching Dave the Jackal. One more shout out. Definitely check out Homicide: Life on the Street. Yeah, I mean, and this is just more of these gentle compliments I can make for this whole entire thing. I love going back to that boot camp. I like when he's like, oh, I guess I'm ready to go into action. And Julie, this woman who's hired him, the private investigator, says, you're not remotely close to being ready, but we're out of time. There's just some really beautiful moments. There's the conversation he has with Dee Dee where he's remembering his wife and just talking about her. Once again, I can only imagine what it's like for people who are losing a spouse after being together for decades. I like how he decides to give his, in his own adept way, he just randomly decides to give his fake daughter the name of Froggy and how it actually ends up sticking.
Yes.
And then like throughout the whole time, that's a running joke throughout the whole rest of the season of show.
I love it.
Yeah, and the last thing I mentioned, I had mentioned here is I just like looking at this beautiful backdrop just when they're shooting outside because they're actually shooting in, you see, just during a conversation, you see Alcatraz, you see the Ferris wheel at the wharf, just all these little details, which it's probably expensive to shoot in San Francisco, but this is just the first episode we're talking about here at this moment. I love the whole vibe.
I agree. It's beautiful. And the more we learn about this senior living community, I think it must cost a king's ransom to stay there.
It must cost a fortune in San Francisco. Yes, exactly. All these people have IT money, I think.
Yeah, they're all the parents of people who work at Google, I guess.
Exactly. Although we only hear what is Salesforce, right? The one guy's.
That's right.
I did love that, by the way. This is the experience my parents have to talk about to their friends about what I do for a living as well, where they say, oh, this guy is a solution engineer. I know exactly what that is, by the way. I've worked with these people many times before. He's a solution engineer at Salesforce. And he's like, oh, that's great for you. What does that mean? He's like, I don't know. Exactly correct. That's how our parents think about all our jobs. Maybe not your job. You have a career that's been defined as a career for over a century.
Yes, it's true.
Maybe centuries, actually. And then I have just some little pointers to go through from episode to episode. First of all, speaking of just bringing in people that we haven't seen in forever, we see Sally Smothers shows up here as one of his romantic interests.
Yes.
We see Veronica Cartwright from Alien, by the way, much younger in Alien, obviously. Surprising. I haven't seen her in forever. Here's some more jokes in the title, Sona, just so you know. Episode 2 is called The Man Who Knew Too Much About Bridges. I did like the way he tries to communicate with Dee Dee. He tries to get into the whole undercover role when he says, if you see me with a pocket square in, which by the way is the logo for the show, is the pocket square. He's like, when I have this pocket square in, it means I'm undercover. And she goes, you're undercover the whole time you're here. And he goes, then this sucker stays put.
Yeah.
I thought it was very sweet to see him struggling to like make friends, which is something that I think we all deal with as we get older.
Oh my gosh. Yes. At the breakfast the first morning. Yes, absolutely.
And then of course he decides to make drinks for everybody. And after happy hour, everybody's friends. Alcohol makes everything easier.
That was a fantastic scene.
I like when he wakes up the next morning, he has the pizza stuck to his back.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing. I'm hungry. At this point, just kind of, you're back in high school again, right? It's something that I was so surprised. I've made this revelation over and over again over the course of my life. I remember when I was high school age and looking at the people around me. And, there are my friends' parents that I did like. There's my friends' parents that I didn't like. But in my mind, I'm like, well, at least they like have a family. They have a job. They have figured themselves out, right? Like minimally. That's what happens when you get older. And then to get to that age and be like, everyone's still in high school. Everybody still has the exact same hangups. And now to see my parents, and they are like literally still have the same animosity, not my parents, but people of that age group that I know via my parents and my wife's parents. Well, they literally in some cases still have the same hangups with people they've known since high school. Like it's an incredible revelation that like I see my daughter just starting to deal with like the clickiness and some of those, she said this about me. And I'm like, are you sure that happened? And like kind of these animosities you build up and maybe you overbuild in your mind and the clickiness basically of our interactions with each other. And I see it with her and I see it with the parents we interact with and how they can become clicky. But then I see my parents still having some of these things as they get older, like their kids got into a fight. So now they can't hang out with each other anymore. And I'm like, oh my God, do we ever escape this mindset in our whole entire lives? I guess not, right?
You can opt out of it, right? But then
Yes.
you're kind of on the side. And I feel like in some ways I have opted out of it as a parent. And I feel that consequence when I go to birthday parties. And my husband actually accompanied me to a birthday party last week, which is very, very unusual for very specific circumstances that will probably not ever occur again in my life. But anyway, as we were standing there, he said, oh, those are the cool moms over there. And he was, pointing to this little group of women that had been chatting through the whole party. And, it was very high school. And I am very on the fringes of that because when I hear things about what the cool moms are up to, I think, well, I want no part of that being,
right.
Drafting a letter to this one's teacher for the other one to send because she's not happy with the way her daughter is treated. I mean, that is too much for me. It is a purposeful decision, but it does have consequences when you're at the birthday party and have nobody to talk to. No, I don't think it ends. And if you've ever heard stories from people who are in senior living communities, wow, it is gossipy. Holy cow. Yeah. My mom has a bunch of friends who are in a retirement community in Florida. And apparently one of the friends had the grandson visit and they took the grandson to whatever social event was happening that night. The grandson being a college student or had recently graduated from college. And everyone was gossiping about how much he drank. And I thought, I kind of don't blame him. If I was in a senior community at a social event, right. I probably would decide to have a few drinks too, just to help me get through that, as a 22-year-old. But that's all anyone could talk about for the next week.
They also apparently have crazy VD outbreaks at those retirement communities.
Yes.
I guess you have to worry about birth control at that age. So
yeah,
but it's like
you got to worry about chlamydia though.
True, absolutely. They don't delve into that in this show. To your point of like, they definitely could go on a tangent on that if they wanted to. Speaking of, there's a really good episode of Poker Face. Speaking of Peacock yet again, when is that show ever going to come back? Who knows? A huge hit for them. And We're still waiting for season 2 on that one. There's an episode that takes place in a retirement community, and they, address some of these things a little more directly, some of the more mature aspects of this lifestyle. Not here. This is a very, very gentle show.
Very. And I appreciated that.
Sure. We don't have to break down each one of these episodes. It's really not worth it. But I did want to shout out episode 3, which for me was the funniest of the 3 episodes of all these episodes, but has the worst title, which is The Emily Always Rings Twice instead of The Postman Always Rings Twice, which is not so, by the way, that's just a film noir. But, there are 2 Emilys because of the whole mix up with his daughter and this woman pretending to be his daughter. So that was kind of funny. But that's not what was really funny here. This is the highlight comedically of this whole entire thing, because it's something I relate to so thoroughly from going to school board meetings, but also from just dealing with old people in general. When they have the grievance meeting and everybody has all these ridiculous complaints. But my favorite is when they say the food is too salty and everybody applauds. And the next person says the food isn't salty enough. And everybody applauds. I'm like, yep, I've been there. And I also, as a movie fan, I also love the fact that they're like, hey, and by the way, someone forgot to return National Treasure 2. And the guy's outraged going, Helen Mirren was in that movie. It's beneath her.
It's beneath her.
And I saw that movie, which is terrible, by the way, but a huge hit. And I remember when Helen Mirren shows up and I'm just like, what is Helen Mirren doing in this movie? So I was like, I was shaking my head the whole time. I'm like, yes, I know it is beneath her. I agree. She said she's a lady.
Well, President Susan is a fantastic character throughout this series.
Yes, absolutely.
So anything she's in is amusing to watch here.
And of course, in episode 3, also, we see Stephen McKinley Henderson, who's like, whenever this actor shows up in anything, I'm always like, oh, I love this guy. And he's been in so many weird things that I've covered here in the podcast. One is that AI series from Alex Garland called Devs on Hulu, where he's one of the computer scientists there. Gives a great performance. He's in Dune. He's the calculator in the first Dune movie, the Denis Villeneuve one recently. And this year, another Alex Garland movie, he was in Civil War. He's one of the journalists. And anyway, whenever he shows up, I'm always like, oh, so love to see this guy in anything. Someone who I don't think became famous until he was much later in life. Such a great actor. And he basically becomes, over the course of the season, you almost know this is going to happen when he shows up in episode 3. Like, this guy's going to become like his best friend. And that's exactly what happens over the course of the show. Pretty much around episode 4. By the way, Sona, if you wanted to know the title of this one, it's called The Curious Case of the Dog in the Painting Class. So not great, but a pun on The Curious Case of the Dog in the Night.
Sure.
I did want to mention here that at the beginning of every episode, once again, something that vibes do not mesh at all with this, but I guess it's a reference point, that he's talking to his voice memo every single morning. And there's just jazzy music playing, which is a direct reference to Dale Cooper talking to his voice recorder at the beginning of every episode of Twin Peaks.
I did not get that. Thanks for pointing it out.
Sure, even with the musical reference. But I mean, once again, this is not Twin Peaks vibes at all, other than a little bit of that reference. Other than that, it does not become like a psychedelic head trip or anything later on. I just laughed reading this note here. I did like the fact that one of the women who works in the retirement community, her characteristic is that she loves Mambo Number 5, but gets all the lyrics wrong.
Hysterical. And the words she was actually singing.
A little bit of Babadook in my spine.
Insane.
That made me laugh out loud.
That was an LOL for sure.
Another very funny moment here was later on when Edie shows up and tells him that he's not doing the investigation right. She goes, "You're shitting the bed," and he goes, "In a good way." And then he extends the metaphor later on, going that he starts to unravel the mystery. He goes, "I just laundered those sheets which I shat earlier." That was really funny. I also liked the fact. Now I'm laughing and reading my notes. She says that he should watch Donnie Brasco to talk about being, and he confused it with Donnie Darko. He goes,
right.
I watched that with my daughter. So very early on in the show, I'm like, I know exactly how this mystery is going to be solved.
I too had a feeling of how this was going to turn out.
And it is sad, here in the course of the show that I really see that Danson's character, Charles, is dealing with the memory of the dementia that his wife suffered through.
And I did cry at least twice while watching this, by the way.
Oh, what moments made you cry?
It was definitely towards the final episodes. The scenes between him and his daughter, where they are finally going through all of her stuff and deciding what to keep and not.
Yeah.
was one. And then I think the other was when they were talking to each other in the car, when she says, well, I'm driving you back to San Francisco and we're going to work this out right now. There was something exchanged between them that I really thought was very touching. I can't remember what it was. I can very much relate to the daughter trying to work out the baggage that has accumulated over the years because of the feeling that I very much have with my parent of like, I don't know how much time there is left. And
Right.
I want us to be in a good place whenever we finally reach the end of this. I want us to be in a good place. I want everything that needed to be said to have been said. And I want us to have peace with that. And I felt that from the daughter.
Yeah. I mean, that's a couple of references to their last interactions with her last interaction with her mom and how that had played out. And obviously how she wished that had been a different interaction, their last interaction together. I did like the car ride, by the way, where she decides to, no, we're going to have this conversation right now. I did love, that he, I do this as well. Like if I have a long car trip or whatever, I always have a podcast ready to go. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that he's just like, after 10 seconds of discussing it, he's like, well, we had our conversation.
Right.
And he pops in his earbuds and she's like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I was going to listen to, I forget which podcast he listens to, but it's another podcast that I actually listen to also. So I'm like, oh yeah, I have to catch up on that one.
That feeling of disconnect that they both expressed with the relationship, I could very much identify with that at some point, this parent who raised you, who you spent so much time with and who you were so connected with in a good way or a bad way, who knows? But like at some point you get disconnected and you don't know how to get that connect back.
Yeah, and I don't consider this a spoiler, but I don't think you can spoil the show, by the way. It's just something you laugh at. It's so gentle and beautiful. And, like I said, touches on all these things without ever being dark about them and actually being like very life affirming about even the end of life.
Oh, yes. The other time I cried was when that character died. It just reminded me.
Oh, yes. Yeah, right. Yep.
Yes.
That was sad, too. Like, once again, just this unexpected way that people can die without spoiling who it is. But yes, it's surprising when that happens for sure. And at the same time, not surprising. Oh, like I said, I don't think this could be spoiled, but if you want to skip ahead, we're going to, I'm just going to mention one point, which is I didn't cry at all during this show, but it did feel warm-hearted.
I'm up to 3 times now. Yeah. Okay.
But maybe the closest I came to it, the most emotional reaction I had, I think, was very late in the show when there's a wedding. Once again, don't spoil anything, but he's sitting with Gladys at the wedding. He's just being there for her. She is lost in her own memory. She has dementia, this character. You see how he probably was comfortable once again in this role because this was the thing that was probably like onerous for him with his wife. And now you see him really enjoying being there for her in a way that other people are uncomfortable being there for her because they don't want to acknowledge this thing. And he is now in a way appreciating having that role in a way that he probably never did when it was his responsibility, right? And I just thought it was so tender and beautiful.
Yes, and this reminds me of yet another time that I teared up, or it's kind of encompassed in one of those that I described, is when he's talking with his daughter about how he felt he, in a way, didn't do right by his wife because he had promised her something and then he had gone back on that promise and it didn't really come to fruition. So really it made no difference. I just thought it was conveyed in such a way that really resonated that, he was living with that pain of feeling that he had let his wife down.
Hey, and you're right. In a way, that plot point kind of resolved itself for him, but he still has to live with the fact that he wasn't willing to do the thing that he had promised to do for sure. And of course, that's all something we're going to have to deal with, unfortunately, someday as well. But if you are dealing with these things, this isn't something like salt in the wound of like something like a film that I think is one of my favorite films of the past few years is a film called The Father that Anthony Hopkins won an Academy Award for during the pandemic. I don't think it has been seen that widely, but it is extraordinary. And it puts you in the mind space of someone who is going through dementia. It is so powerful. But I can imagine if you have a family member that is going through this, that would be traumatic, like difficult to watch that film, right? Although I think it's still worth it because it puts you in their shoes, which is something that is really powerful, I think. This show, I think, would not be like triggering for someone who's going through this. I think it's actually something that would be pretty uplifting about it. And like I said, makes even something that maybe is seen as a nightmare scenario uplifting in a way. Like that whole trip he goes in the last episode or two, I guess it's the next to last episode, where he goes with this new friend of his to see San Francisco, but his version of San Francisco, I thought was just so beautiful because, you live in New York and you love New York, but you can imagine that, especially being in a city for a long period of time, your version of that city, your version of your hometown is so different than somebody else's.
Yes.
And, it's a real act of friendship and charity to be like, no, I don't want to do what I want to do. I want to do what you want to do. Right. And it's like something that in a way, I think the show is even inviting us to do, not only with our friendships, but definitely with our aging parents, is to have that experience with them, which I don't think we do at all. I mean, I for sure do not grant my parents that charity enough. So yeah, I thought that was really well done. Did you have anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
One set of jokes that was kind of, the B plot relating to the daughter and her family, how all three of the boys broke a bone in connection
at the same
trying to slam dunk a basketball by using the trampoline, I thought was great. And the exposition of it, and the sequence of events that led all three of them to be involved in this and hurt themselves, I thought was great.
It's so funny because boys and girls are so different. And my nephews, for example, were always like in a race to get stitches. And my daughter is the exact opposite. She's like so wary and God. She has to be 110% confident to do something before she does it, which makes her very hesitant to try things, but also keeps her from breaking any bones. So luckily for that.
Yeah. Also the scene where the one boy is looking in the refrigerator trying to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and cannot figure out where anything is. We have lived that. And I always say, I can see it from where I am. So you need to find it. That's the only hint I'll give. Totally relate to that.
Yeah. In the way that I was saying, my daughter is different than boys from like breaking bones and trying to kill themselves. But yes, in that regard, can I get a snack? Yes. You know where the snacks are. And you open the pantry and being like, I can't see it. I can't see it. It's just like, it's directly in front of your face. Just literally stick your hand directly forward and you will touch it. But no, can't see it. I don't know where it is.
Staying with that topic of that part of the family, very sweet, the scenes between the grandfather and the grandkids. I like that a lot.
Yes, I love that too. And another thing that I think is really touched on here, in like how he needs to re-energize himself. He like really feels like he's betraying these people. He needs a break from that all. He goes and does not have this honest relationship with his daughter because it's too close to what he's gone through. But even then, even though that is not working perfectly, the fact that he can relate, and this, of course, we all deal with this too, he can relate with the grandkids in a way that they just roll their eyes at their mom, but they don't mind hanging out with grandpa. And of course, grandpa does not have a great relationship. And by the way, speaking of that sandwich generation, I think that is part of what is taxing to us as well, where we have to parent our kids and parent our parents. And then they get to do, like my parents are total sociopaths, do whatever the hell they want to do. The kids are total sociopaths. They do whatever the hell they want to do. They even get along with each other. They even gang up against you. And it's just like, you know what? I am the only one that's keeping all you guys even like functional day to day.
That's right.
Do not lay this crap on me. And, but nonetheless, they are their own support network for each other. So you just got to take the good with the bad.
Yes.
Yeah, so all that is to say that this was a surprise for me. I didn't watch it for the reasons I thought I was going to. I thought this was going to be like a spy spoof with an older spy, which was kind of the marketing for it. But it ends up being incredibly generous. It shows there are no bad guys. Even, early on, the investigator is pretty convinced that there's some bad, nefarious folks working within the organization. And I like the fact that there is humanity given to everybody. Dee, poor Dee, it's so put upon. She has her own family issues going on. She gets offered this corporate job. The people in corporate, they're just trying to do their job too, right? Like there's nobody who's a villain here. Everyone's just kind of trying to get by, which of course is always my feeling in general, that people are always just trying to make the best of their circumstance. And of course, those things just don't align. So oftentimes just talking to each other will resolve these things. And that's kind of what this is.
What was really interesting, though, is they touched upon this idea. They didn't do anything with it, of private equity taking over everything, which I have been hearing a lot about how private equity has become involved in everything and, to many negative consequences, because things that need a human touch are being run like a corporation. And there are really awful consequences of that. So I thought that was interesting that they kind of introduced that. And they did have Dee Dee decide in the end that she needed to stay with her senior citizen resident, which I like. But there probably is a lot to be said there. But, again, I appreciated that this show picked a lane and stayed in it. So.
Yeah, I was thinking at one point it's going to be like We Care a Lot meets
exactly
The Good Place or something, but it did not go that route. But speaking of that, once again, we do have someone in an extended family that is demented, and they were in a nursing home in Florida, and this exact thing happened. They were acquired by a larger corporation, added a lot more patients. They cut their staff to, maximize profits, obviously. And she immediately backslid into, she couldn't walk. She couldn't get out of her chair. She was deeply demented. No, when you would go visit her, not us, but our family members, when they would go visit, she didn't have any recall of them. She had backslid very, very badly. So they had moved her to another facility, a smaller one, closer to them, because they're thinking like she's at end of life at this point. But now they have a smaller staff that spends more time socializing with them. And she is now walking. She's talking again. She has completely reverted to, where she was a year or two ago, just because, isolation is the number one killer of these people. Once again, speaking more serious themes, something that is addressed here in the show, specifically that, the person who hired them because a piece of jewelry disappeared, is very concerned that his mom might not be safe because of this jewelry disappearance, but is not concerned enough to visit her every once in a while. And they're saying that's how these people really disconnect from the world and end up isolated and dying, is just because, especially when they're demented, and this is a true fact, that they fade very quickly when they don't have that human touch. And that is definitely happening. There's definitely something that's happening. You can imagine the amount of the population, as that population continues to grow and it becomes a money-making machine, it's going to become more and more depersonalized.
Right.
And this is something that the show is touching on very lightly, but something that is a real issue. This literally happens at her nursing facility. They call it going to the mall, and they will get up at night and wander around and go into other people's rooms and take their stuff, basically. And they'll be like, oh, we went to the mall last night. They literally say this. And I'm like, oh,
interesting.
They're stealing each other's stuff constantly, right?
Wow.
Maybe there's a darker version of season 2 of this where he goes into one of these.
Yeah.
And then he gets locked away somewhere, and Dee Dee has to come rescue him. Dee Dee and Emily have to gang up to rescue him from one of these isolation wards. I actually hope the show doesn't go that direction. But there's a lot of food for thought here. And once again, especially if people have family members who are in these facilities, they probably are dealing with these very circumstances. Even at the worst facility that I was mentioning in that personal example, there was like one particular younger guy who was still trying to have one-on-one time, but it's really like out of the kindness of their heart. They're like almost taking their lunch breaks to spend extra time with these people because they have an emotional connection to them. But like Dee Dee in this show, it's almost them going above and beyond because they are worked to, they're completely overtasked with what they have to do.
It's a labor of love.
Kudos to those people.
Yes.
You are the real heroes.
For sure.
For real, actually. All right, Sona. So we can leave it there. Definitely a thumbs up, I assume, from you.
Yes, for sure.
And of course, all the other Mike Schur things we mentioned here before. Check out Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Check out The Good Place. He was one of the producers on Parks and Rec. Not the creator of that show, though. But anyway, just anything he's touched basically has been definitely worth watching.
Agree.
And this one's another winner. I often complain that I don't watch a lot of this Netflix content in general, but this is something that's not on the box going to sound like this is the next binge. It's not, it's the next Squid Game. It's not, but it's apparently working. So I guess it takes all kinds to make Netflix
that's right.
The impersonal empire that it is. And sometimes they make good stuff too. Speaking of Squid Game, have you watched any of season 1 of Squid Game?
I haven't, but I need to.
Yeah, season 2 is coming on Christmas.
I've not seen the movie. So was there a movie?
No, it's just season. It's just one season. Okay. Yeah. It's like 6 episodes.
But then there was a game show based on.
Yes, you can skip.
And that's where I'm getting confused. Yes. There was the actual TV series, and then there was a game show based on it. Did you watch the game show at all? I
am one of the people who agrees with the criticism that the game show of this was completely and utterly missing the point of
Yeah,
the
because it's
series.
dark, right? It's something dark.
Oh, it's so dark. Like
Yeah.
this series is so, in a way, so anti-capitalist, and comments on the fact that even when we are aware of the trap we're in, we go back to it. It's like an addiction. And then of course they make a game show out of it, being like, who can last the longest? I'm like, it's completely missing the point of the show. All that is to be said that I binged the whole game show. I got totally sucked into it. So I agree that it's garbage, and I still watched it. So it was really compelling. So if there was a real Squid Game, I would probably watch it. That's what it comes down to. Season 2 is coming at Christmas. So you should start watching now. If you watch like one episode a week right now, you would catch up. But you're not going to watch one episode a week. You're going to watch like after episode 1 probably, but definitely after episode 3, you're going to be like, I have to binge this whole thing in one day.
I can totally see that.
Yeah, it's very compelling. Season 2 is coming. I don't know if the show needs a season 2, but I mean, I'm curious, so I will definitely watch it. And of course, everybody in the world will be watching it, considering the massive success of the first show. But that's another Netflix thing coming. But of course, in the immediate future, this week, Sona, Friday, we will have, The Agency, which I'm very much looking forward to. I did not have high expectations for The Day of the Jackal, and there's some very dumb things about The Day of the Jackal. But in general, I've been so locked into this show. It's so thrilling.
Fantastic.
Which just makes me more thrilled for The Agency, which looks to be much, much better. So I'm very curious to see that show. And, a lot of these times you think about these shows, like, are they going to nail the landing? But this is actually based on a French series, which is available on Hulu, which I've also not seen any of. But apparently that show is fantastic from beginning to end and nails the landing. So they don't have to, I mean, as long as they follow the blueprint of before, they're not going to screw up the ending or whatever. So I'm very curious to see this. And it starts this Friday. So anyway, we will touch base. Sona and I will probably cover that one probably next Sunday, I would assume. It'd be a good time to record. And so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, watch this. Oh, and this week I have off from week. So I have off from work this entire week. I will be recording some other standalone episodes. I caught up on Arcane, very interesting, on Netflix once again, something that you would not be interested in, Sona, but I found really fascinating. Oh, and Sona, I will be rewatching Severance, probably the whole thing this week. And I'll be republishing our conversations from the first time around with any additional insights that I'm picking up with a second go around.
Fantastic.
It's been almost 3 years since that series, so we all need a refresher on it. So I will be refreshing myself this week. And do expect me to publish those episodes. I'll record them this week and then publish them over the course of the next month or so, until the lead up to Severance Season 2, which is going to be big for all of us.
Yeah, I'm really hoping they come through with the previously on, because I need a lot of refreshing on Severance.
Well, maybe what I'll do is I will record those episodes in this upcoming week. And then what I'll do is I will republish there was another episode I published where I was like recommendations if you liked Severance. So maybe I'll republish that episode also. But Sona, what I'll do is I will be like, hey, I rewatched the whole entire series. Ask me anything you want. And then I'll just do that whole thing as a, kind of a refresher for you and a quick refresher for the audience. I'll just stick on the recommendation episode at the same time.
Great.
And anyway, so look forward to that. That will be additional to the coverage. There's so much stuff that's coming out in the next month or two. So I'll have new reviews, the refresher on Severance, plus we'll be talking about The Agency, plus Day of the Jackal will be wrapping up. Lots of stuff. And Squid Game is coming out in a month or so. So anyway, lots of stuff to cover. All right, Sona, thank you as usual.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later.